my life, all of this was happening at one time. In one 6 or 8 month period, I found that my relationship with my significant other was crumbling. My job had literally disappeared. They downsized me. I was out of work, and my health had deteriorated tremendously. And this was all happening in the same period of time. So, of course, I woke up just as you suggested, and I called out to the God of my understanding. What does it take to make life work? I mean, I don't understand. What is it that I'm missing here that I don't understand? The understanding of which could change everything. I was 50 years old. I was 49, going on 50, so I had been on the planet 1/2 of a century, and I had very little to show for it. Not that success is necessarily measured by the material things we have, but on the other hand, when you're down to zero, practically down to nothing after 50 years, you have to ask yourself, what's been the point of all this, and what have I not learned yet that I'm supposed to know in order to make some sense of all of this. So that's briefly my story without getting into the month-by-month details of it. And it doesn't differ, frankly, from the story of many people, if not most people. My experience, as I've talked about this around the world the past 12 years, is that almost everyone at some point in their life or another gets to that place that we would call the nadir of our existence, the lowest point that we've had in our lives, when, whatever the particular circumstances, we wake up in the middle of the night and we say, what's going on? What have I missed? What don't I understand? That's the issue. That's the point here. And every human being faces that dark night of the soul, and that's where the messages of Conversations with God have been salvific. They've changed the lives of people all over the world, and rightly they should, because these are the messages of all the world's great religions rolled into one, of all the world's great wisdom traditions rolled into one. These are the messages that we have been sent from the beginning of time, and they're all here in one place in these few books. And so they represent an astonishing resource for humanity, in
Neale,
my opinion.
Are you saying that it's a prerequisite for humans to go into that dark night of the soul, to be the ashes biter, if you will, the Cinderella story?
No, it's not. It's not a prerequisite, and that's one of the big messages, really, of the Conversations with God books and of the dialogue is, in fact, just that. Thank you for asking that question. It's a wonderful question, and it's an important one. It's a good place to start because it is not a prerequisite. But the trouble is that most people, and myself included, have not developed a true relationship with God. Not a really workable two-way functioning relationship with God. I'm not saying no one. I'm saying most people, from my observation, the largest number of people have not developed that kind of a functioning relationship with God. And frankly, many do not seek to until that dark night of the soul, until things come crashing down, and then we call out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?
Now, well, you see, if I ask people, does God speak to you? I mean, you've asked this for a lot of people, but when I ask it, I get a lot of puzzled looks. People I know have a good relationship with God, at least they feel that they do, but they don't necessarily think that God converses back to them. Now, I know that God told you, I talk to everyone all the time. The question is, who is listening? So I guess that's really the question, is how does one go about listening to God?
Well, the first thing we have to do is admit to the possibility that it can occur. That's the very first step, is we have to acknowledge and admit to the possibility that, in fact, God is talking to all of us all the time. And that's not a small admission. In fact, there are many of the world's religions which teach just the opposite, that God would not speak to us. I mean individually. That God speaks to us through His emissaries, if you please, or through His messengers, or through His prophets and saints and sages, but that God would not speak to individual people, the average man on the street, but only to the holy and the hallowed. And I repeat, many of the world's religions actually teach that and say that if you imagine yourself to have been conferred with, if you please, or conversed with directly by God, and if you announce this to other people, that you've committed a blasphemy, that such a statement is apostasy. I want to say that there are some religions which actually say it is apostasy for one to declare that one has received a message directly from God. For these messages are reserved only for the prophets and the sages and the saints of our of our time and of our history. So the very first step in hearing that conversation, since you asked the question, is to admit to the possibility of it. And that's not a small step. For many of the world's religions and the participants therein, it is a step that requires enormous courage because, in fact, as I said, it is labeled a blasphemy, heresy, and apostasy. The second step, if we can get over the first bridge and actually allow as to how God could be speaking directly to us, is to imagine that even though it's possible for most of humanity, I as an individual, that is the person that I'm considering right now, me, myself, and I, that I am worthy of receiving these communications, that it is possible for humanity at large to receive, that somehow I stand in a place of worthiness, and that despite what I imagine to be my sins against the universe, my faults and my foibles, the injuries that I have inflicted upon others, and so forth, that I still stand in the light of worthiness, and that God would in fact talk to me specifically and individually. The third step after I get over, and that's not a small step either, by the way. People have been in therapy around that step for 25 years. So we're not talking about small steps here, and yet I don't want to discourage people. These steps can be traversed. These steps can be negotiated in an instant if we choose to, but it does take I would think, enormous determination and courage. The third step, after accepting our own self-worth, is then opening our eyes, our ears, and all of our senses to the incoming messages that God is sending us, and to relieve ourselves of any expectation that those messages would come to us in a particular way. Maybe I heard them as a conversation. Maybe somebody else hears them as just the right book that falls into your hands, literally jumps off the shelf at you, or the words to the next song you hear on the radio, or the chance utterance of a friend on the street, as Conversations with God itself discusses and describes, or the billboard around the next corner as you turn around the block, and there it is, unexpectedly answering the very question that your heart has been pondering for weeks.